Welcome to episode 2 of the ACCA Technical Edge. Imagine a company where the CEO, the HR department, and the factory workers are all locked in this silent, permanent civil war for control over how work gets done.
Yeah, which sounds like a total disaster, doesn't it?
It really does. But, well, according to the management theorist Henry Mintzberg, that is actually just a normal Tuesday in the corporate world.
Exactly. It's just business as usual.
Right. And if you are listening to this deep dive right now, chances are you are an ACCA student prepping for Paper F1 or FAB, Accountant in Business.
And specifically, we know you're probably looking at Part B of the syllabus, right? The part that tackles business organization structure.
Yeah, exactly. And textbooks, they often present this topic as this really dry list of charts to memorize. But our mission today is to break that mold entirely.
We want to make Mintzberg's theories simple, highly memorable, and, easy to recall when you're sitting in that exam hall under pressure.
So to start, the first step to mastering this material is kind of throwing out how you currently think about organizations.
Absolutely. Because standard organizational models like the entrepreneurial, functional, or matrix structures, they focus almost purely on relationships.
Like who reports to who?
Right. You look at a traditional org chart, and it is simply a series of two-dimensional boxes connected by lines. It tells you the hierarchy.
It shows you who the boss is.
Yeah, but it tells you absolutely nothing about the underlying mechanics of the business.
Right. It completely fails to explain how the work actually gets accomplished on a Tuesday morning.
Which is the most important part. And Henry Mintzberg recognized that flaw, which is why his theory is such a massive paradigm shift.
He abandons the traditional reporting lines completely, doesn't he?
He does. Instead, he breaks down an organization into 5 generic components based entirely on their role in coordinating activities.
So he's looking at the mechanisms of coordination.
Exactly. How did these different groups actually interact to produce a tangible outcome?
And this is the crucial conceptual leap for your exam. To pass, you need to understand not just the definitions of these 5 components, but the inherent tension between them.
Right, because, like we mentioned at the top, they do not just sit quietly in their designated boxes on some PowerPoint slide.
No, they are competing strategic imperatives. They are constantly fighting this tug of war for influence over how the company operates.
And the winner of that internal tug of war completely changes the shape, the culture, and, well, the structural reality of the organization.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can understand the 5 final structures, we have to meet the 5 players on the board. Mintzberg's 5 building blocks.
And to help translate this from, abstract theory into something you can actually visualize, let's use an analogy.
Yeah, let's think of a business organization as a massive, complex theater production.
I love that. That analogy perfectly isolates the challenge of coordination. In any stage production, you have drastically different roles that must somehow align to deliver a single performance.
Right. So player number 1 in Mintzberg's model is the strategic apex.
Which, in our theater analogy, the strategic apex is the director and the executive producers.
They hold the grand vision for the play.
Exactly. In a corporate setting, this element is made up of your directors and your senior executives.
So the people at the very top.
Right. Their primary function is interpreting and defining the mission of the organization. They ensure that every operational objective is consistent with that overarching vision.
They act as the brain of the organism.
Well put. And beyond just the internal vision, the strategic apex manages the organization's relationship with the macro environment.
So they're looking outside the company's 4 walls.
Yeah, dealing with macroeconomic shifts, securing capital from investors, navigating major strategic threats, that sort of thing.
They are keeping their eyes on the horizon. Moving down from the director, the second block is the operating core.
Right. And these are the actors on the stage.
The people doing the actual work.
Exactly. The operating core comprises the people who physically carry out the activities necessary to deliver the final outputs.
So in a car manufacturing plant, this is the assembly line worker.
Or in a public accounting firm, it is the junior and senior accountants who are actively auditing the books and drafting the reports.
They are the muscles of the operation.
Yeah, and without the operating core, there is no product, there's no service, and obviously no revenue.
Which brings us to the third piece, the middle line. Think of these folks as the stage managers.
The middle line provides the vital translation layer between the strategic apex and the operating core.
Because, A CEO cannot be on the factory floor micromanaging every single worker, right?
Right. Just as a theater director cannot stand on stage giving line readings to every actor during a live performance, it just doesn't work.
So the middle line steps in.
Yes. They take the high-level, abstract expectations from the strategic apex and translate them into practical, actionable instructions for the operating core.
They make sure the daily tasks actually move the needle on the big picture strategy.
Exactly. But there is a potential trap here for the exam.
Oh, really? What's that?
Well, students often assume that every company automatically has all 5 parts right from day one.
Ah, I see where you're going. But a very simple, small organization might skip the middle line entirely, wouldn't it?
Precisely. If you look at a tech startup with just, say, 4 software developers and a founder, the founder is speaking directly to the team.
Middle management simply doesn't exist yet.
Right. That is an excellent distinction to keep in your notes. The middle line only emerges and grows as the organization scales and direct supervision becomes physically impossible.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now, the fourth component is where the mechanisms of control get highly specialized. It is called the technostructure.
And in our theater analogy, the technostructure would be the choreographers, the set designers, the lighting technicians.
So they are not acting on the stage themselves.
No, but they are dictating the exact parameters of how the performance must happen. They write the rules.
Okay, so in a business context, who are they?
The technostructure is made up of key professionals working in functions like human resources, training, finance, and strategic planning.
And Mintzberg actually breaks this down into 2 specific roles that frequently appear on the F1 FAB exam, right? Analyzers and planners.
Yes. Let's look at analyzers first.
Analyzers seem to be the ones obsessed with standardizing the actual human beings.
That's a good way to put it. They decide on the single best way to perform a job, and they seek to standardize skills.
So like an HR department, standardizing the onboarding and training process for every single new hire, they are acting as an analyzer.
Exactly. Now, planners operate slightly differently. They decide on the outputs.
Meaning they define the strict quality requirements and production quotas.
Right. A financial planning team setting rigid departmental budgets. Or a quality control team establishing defect tolerances, they're acting as planners.
So the unifying trait of the technostructure is just this relentless drive for standardization, predictability, and control.
They want the business to run like a finely tuned clock.
Right. Finally, we have the 5th block, the support staff. This represents the people running the theater's box office, or maybe the catering team feeding the crew.
Or the public relations agency promoting the show.
Yeah. And the exam distinction you must drill into your memory regarding support staff is their relationship to the end product.
This is key. Support staff includes functions like research and development, public relations, and legal services.
So their outputs do not contribute directly to the core purpose of the organization.
Correct. Well, let me make sure I have this straight, though. A corporate tax lawyer working in-house for a global smartphone manufacturer
Is not building smartphones, they aren't designing smartphones, and they aren't selling smartphones.
Exactly. But their activities heavily dictate the efficiency and survivability of everyone else who is building those phones.
Because the strategic apex relies on legal to avoid massive lawsuits.
And the middle line relies on the IT support staff to keep their communication networks online.
And R&D finds the technological breakthroughs that will keep the company alive in 5 years.
Right. So they support the core without being fundamentally part of the core delivery process.
Okay, so we have our 5 players defined. The strategic apex at the top, the operating core doing the work, the middle line connecting them, the technostructure standardizing the rules, and the support staff facilitating the environment.
And now we move to the tug of war.
Because they all want to coordinate the business in a way that maximizes their own influence.
What's fascinating here is that each of these 5 elements has a deeply ingrained preferred means of coordination. Their ideal way of running the business stems directly from their function.
Right, so let's outline the rules of this coordination battle. The strategic apex, the directors they naturally want to coordinate through direct supervision.
Because they possess the grand vision, they carry the ultimate responsibility, and their preferred mechanism is simply giving direct orders and watching them be executed.
Which allows for immediate pivots and total control.
Exactly, which is why it is the dominant coordination mechanism in very small, early-stage organizations.
But the middle line, however, seeks to standardize outputs.
Right.
Why outputs specifically, though?
Because the middle line acts as an interpreter managing a vast number of subordinates. They cannot physically watch every worker perform every task.
That makes sense.
So They do not necessarily need to mandate how the job is done, provided the final product output meets the targets set by the apex. They manage by measuring end results.
Okay, then the technostructure, meanwhile, attempts to standardize work processes.
Yes. They are the authors of the 500-page standard operating procedure manuals.
Their power comes from writing the rules.
Completely. They want every single step of a job mapped out to eliminate variability and ensure total uniformity across the entire workforce.
And then the operating core approaches coordination from the complete opposite direction.
Right. They try to standardize skills.
They want the organization to rely on their internalized training, their professional certifications, and, well, their inherent expertise.
They want management to step back, recognize them as highly trained professionals, and basically trust their skills to get the job done without micromanagement.
Okay, wait, let me jump in and push back on this model for a second.
Go for it.
Wait, if every single department wants to coordinate things a different way, isn't a business just a constant, chaotic turf war? How does any work actually get done?
I mean, it sounds like a recipe for total paralysis, doesn't it?
It really does, if all 5 components are pulling the company in completely different directions.
Well, Mintzberg's brilliant insight is that the organization doesn't remain in a state of permanent stalemate.
But it doesn't.
No. Based on the industry, the economic environment, and the scale of the company, one of these 5 elements naturally accumulates the most relative influence.
Ah, so one element actually wins the tug of war.
Yes. And when that element wins, the entire organization reshapes itself to accommodate that winner's preferred method of coordination.
Okay, so that cause and effect relationship is the secret to memorizing the rest of the syllabus.
Exactly. Knowing who wins the coordination battle logically generates Mintzberg's 5 specific categories of organization structures.
So let's trace how that happens, starting with what happens when the strategic apex holds all the power.
When the strategic apex dominates, you get the simple structure. Power radiates directly from a chief executive or a very tight executive team.
And because coordination happens through direct supervision, the organization remains highly centralized, incredibly informal, and very flexible.
Right. In our theater analogy, this is like a small, passionate indie theater troupe.
The visionary director is calling every shot, adjusting the lighting themselves, giving the actors constant direct feedback.
And the troupe can change the entire play the night before opening just because everyone answers to one person.
But there is a massive risk to this structure, and I love this quote. Mintzberg explicitly warns, one heart attack can wipe out the organization's prime coordinating mechanism.
It is a dark mnemonic device, but highly effective for the exam.
It definitely sticks with you.
Yeah, if the founder holds all operational knowledge in their head and uses direct supervision for every decision, the company structurally cannot function if they are removed.
Right. So what happens when that simple startup grows too massive for one CEO to supervise?
Well, you have to introduce processes, and this is where the technostructure steps in and wins the tug of war, creating the machine bureaucracy.
Because scale demands predictability.
Exactly.
Right.
In a machine bureaucracy, the strategic planners, the analyzers, and the financial controllers become the most influential people in the building.
And coordination is achieved by heavily standardizing work processes.
Yes. If we go back to the theater, the machine bureaucracy is a massive, multi-million-dollar Broadway spectacle.
Where every actor has a piece of tape on the stage showing them exactly where to stand.
And the lighting cues are automated to the millisecond. No actor is allowed to improvise a single line, because changing one word could throw off the entire highly engineered mechanism.
Wow. The textbook corporate example is a large-scale manufacturing plant or like a fast food franchise, right?
Yes, where every single motion is dictated by a procedure manual.
But offering little discretion for the individual sounds pretty miserable, doesn't it? Like, does Mintzberg address how hard it must be to motivate people here?
He absolutely does. Because tasks are so rigidly defined, the operating core often feels entirely disconnected from the final product.
So motivation becomes a severe challenge.
It does. Furthermore, because changing a process requires rewriting massive amounts of documentation, the machine bureaucracy is notoriously slow to adapt to external changes.
Right. I can see why standardizing processes works for an assembly line. But what if the environment is too complex for a standard manual?
Like what?
Like you can't write a step-by-step manual for performing open-heart surgery.
Exactly. When complex work requires highly specialized knowledge, the operating core wins the tug of war.
And that results in the professional bureaucracy.
Correct. The structure still features clear administrative lines, but coordination relies entirely on standardizing skills.
So the power shifts away from the people writing manuals and moves toward the frontline professionals.
Completely. In a professional bureaucracy, operational standards are usually dictated by external forces.
Like government regulations or professional board certifications.
Yes, or years of rigorous academic training. Hospitals, universities, and large accounting practices are classic examples.
Okay, the theater equivalent would be a world-class symphony orchestra.
Right. The musicians are highly trained professionals. The conductor isn't teaching the first chair violinist how to play their instrument.
No, the coordination happens because they all share a universally standardized skill set developed over decades of practice.
And because of that reliance on highly trained professionals who essentially manage their own day-to-day work, the professional bureaucracy is significantly more democratic than the machine type.
So the autonomy granted to the operating corps makes it much easier to motivate the workforce.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have simple, machine, and professional. But what happens when one of those massive bureaucracies wants to expand globally? Because the headquarters in London can't effectively micromanage a hospital or a factory in Tokyo.
Right. That geographical and operational sprawl necessitates the divisionalized structure, which is driven by the middle line.
Okay, so the middle managers win this one.
Yes. When a company becomes too large or too diverse, the central strategic apex realizes they must surrender some control. They empower the middle line to run semi-autonomous units.
And because headquarters can't monitor the daily processes of a division halfway across the world, they coordinate by standardizing outputs.
Exactly. They tell the head of the Asian division, "We don't care how you structure your daily operations, just deliver a 12% increase in profit margins this quarter."
Wow. Okay, so Mintzberg suggests the divisionalized form is often just a massive umbrella structure.
Yeah, you might have a corporate headquarters overseeing 5 distinct divisions, and internally, each of those 5 divisions might operate as its own rigid machine bureaucracy.
Bringing it back to the theater, this is the global franchise model. You have the hit musical playing in London, but you set up autonomous touring companies in North America and Asia.
Right, and headquarters doesn't manage the daily rehearsals. They just demand that the touring companies hit their box office revenue targets.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Which leaves us with the fifth structure.
The one designed for environments moving too rapidly for manuals, autonomy, or revenue quotas, the adhocracy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The adhocracy is the fascinating wild card of the group, isn't it?
It really is. It emerges when support staff, particularly research and development, become the driving force.
So it is entirely task or project-based.
Yes, the defining characteristic of an adhocracy is its profound lack of formality.
So direct supervision from the top is minimal.
Minimal to non-existent. And standardized processes from the technostructure are actively discouraged.
Wow. Then how do they coordinate?
Instead, coordination happens through mutual adjustment. You pull together a team of highly specialized experts from different fields, put them in a room, and tell them to solve a novel problem.
Okay, so our theater equivalent is an avant-garde experimental improv troupe.
Perfect comparison. There is no script, there are no tape marks on the stage.
The actors are constantly adjusting to the audience and to each other in real time, inventing the play as it happens.
And in the business world, a nimble artificial intelligence startup operates this way.
Because they cannot write a procedure manual for software that has never been invented before.
Exactly. They form a project team, solve a massive technical hurdle, disband, and immediately reform a new team for the next problem.
So it is highly fluid, intensely innovative, and thrives on the very chaos that would destroy a machine bureaucracy.
Yes, perfectly stated.
Okay, so we've covered the 5 shapes a company can take. But a company doesn't just draw one of these structures out of a hat.
No, definitely not.
To fully grasp this for the exam, we have to recognize that the dominant structure is heavily dictated by the era in which a company operates. Let's overlay a historical timeline onto Mintzberg's theory.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the evolution of these structures perfectly tracks the evolution of the global economy.
Okay, so let's look at the past first.
If you look at the distant past, during the height of the Industrial Revolution, simple structures and machine bureaucracies reigned supreme.
Because developing economies relied overwhelmingly on mass production, physical manufacturing, and logistics.
Right. That environment demanded strict technostructures to squeeze every drop of efficiency out of factory floors.
But the global economy fundamentally shifted away from just stamping out identical physical widgets.
It transitioned into the knowledge economy. As developed nations shifted towards service-oriented industries, relying on highly educated knowledge workers, lawyers, software engineers, clinical researchers, the professional bureaucracy naturally flourished.
And concurrently, as globalization allowed companies to scale across borders, the divisionalized form became mandatory just to keep multinational corporations from collapsing under their own weight.
Exactly.
So what about the landscape we're entering right now? What is the future?
Well, Mintzberg argues that the adhocracy will become the paramount structure of the future.
Really? Just pure adhocracy.
Think about the sheer velocity of technological change today, driven by AI, automation, and instant global communication. It creates incredibly volatile markets.
Right. The rigid, slow-moving structures of the machine bureaucracy simply cannot pivot fast enough to survive.
Exactly. Project-based flexibility, rapid innovation cycles, and cross-functional teams will be the baseline requirements for corporate survival.
So what does this all mean? This historical shift is exactly why this topic matters beyond the F1 FAB exam.
You aren't just memorizing definitions, you are learning how to diagnose corporate friction.
You are entering a business world desperately trying to transition from the safety of machine bureaucracies into the fluid chaos of adhocracies.
And when you eventually step in to advise these companies as an accountant, or perhaps lead them yourself, you will need to recognize these deep structural tensions.
Because the tug-of-war never stops.
The players simply adopt new strategies to fit the current economic reality.
Okay, let's do a rapid-fire recap to cement this in your memory before you close your textbook.
Good idea.
First, visualize Mintzberg's 5 parts of the organization. The strategic apex directing at the top, the operating core executing at the bottom,
The middle line translating between them.
the technostructure drafting the rules, and the support staff facilitating the environment.
Second, remember their preferred mechanisms of coordination.
Right. Direct supervision, standardizing outputs, standardizing processes, and standardizing skills.
Third, connect the winner of that battle to the final structure.
Okay, the apex creates the simple structure.
The technostructure builds the machine bureaucracy.
The operating core forms the professional bureaucracy.
The middle line establishes the divisionalized form.
And the need for rapid R&D innovation spawns the adhocracy.
Spot on. But as you wrap up your study session, I want to leave you with one provocative thought regarding your own future.
Oh, what's that?
If Mintzberg is correct, and the adhocracy is the required structure of the modern era, it creates a massive paradox for your profession.
How so?
Well, as a future accountant or financial leader, your core mandate revolves around mitigating risk, maintaining strict financial controls, and standardizing reporting.
Right, that's the whole job.
So how will you maintain necessary financial oversight and standardization in an organization that is intentionally designed to avoid defined processes and embrace constant informal change?
Wow. That is the complex puzzle you will have to solve as you build your career in the real world. Keep studying hard, trust your preparation, and thank you for listening.